Hey guys, welcome back to Morgan Hill Farms. I was down in the garden today with the kids. We were doing some harvesting, some cucumbers, broccoli, cabbage. We were getting some sugar snap peas, some green peas, even some beets. While I was down here, I thought I would come and just take a look at my tomato plants, and I thought I would just film a quick little video for you guys to show you what you really should be doing with your tomatoes whenever you're down in your garden. So the first thing that I'm looking at are the very base of my plants, or the stalks. So I really like to keep my tomato plants pruned up off of the ground. I do have drip irrigation, but we do obviously get rainstorms here, and anything that is splashing back on my tomato plants is going to make it prone to disease. So I want to make sure, I think I pretty much do like the bottom 24 inches of my tomato plant. I want to make sure that nothing is hanging down too low. You can see here on this particular leaf that I have a little bit of disease here, and in fact even on this leaf and this one here, I also have some disease. And so I'm going to be pretty crazy about this, and I am going to make sure to remove anything that has disease on it so that I can keep my tomato plant as disease-free for as long, because once this starts to spread to the rest of my plant, it's very difficult to contain that. The next thing that I'm looking for on my tomato plants are what is called suckers. So as you come up the stalk of your plant, you're gonna notice that you have some leaves coming off of it. Okay, and those are totally fine if they're sticking out or maybe even going down, or they might be slightly up. But if you find that you have something like this, where you have another branch coming out at a 45-degree angle between your stalk and the branch, that is what's known as a sucker. So what you want to do with that is you want to cut that off. And I'm using a little paring knife. I don't recommend using a knife because there have been times where I have sliced my tomato plant. I suggest using like precise little pruning shears or something like that. Basically what this is an entire new plant. Now you could set this in water and it would form roots on it, and you could have a brand new plant. So you've propagated a new tomato plant. However, what it does to your main tomato is that it sucks a lot of the energy from the original tomato plant and puts it into that sucker. So I want to take all of the suckers off so that my main plant can put all of its energy into its fruit and not fruit and other things coming off of these suckers. So I'm going to go through this plant here really quick and look and just take all of these off. And I'm going to do that to every single one of my 200 tomato plants. Now you may run into a scenario where as you are looking for suckers on your plant, you come up the stalk and you find an area where the plant actually forms a V. And what's happening here is your plant is forming two main vines at this point. And this is going to make my plant very unruly. Because I'm growing so many and I'm pretty tight here, I don't want an overgrowth of tomatoes because I don't want disease. I want good airflow. I want to keep the humidity down. And I just want to give my plants the best possible growing conditions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this V and I'm going to say, okay, this side has a branch coming off of it pretty close to where it splits. So I know that this is most likely a sucker. So I'm going to go ahead and I am just going to cut that right off. And then this part of the plant will continue to grow up, and this will just be a branch. That's going to keep my tomatoes nice, compact, and not kind of interfering with the next tomato next to it. Now, I was just down here the other day and was tying up all my tomato plants, so I didn't exactly expect to need to trellis these, so I didn't bring any of my baling twine down. That's what I use. It's like an orange fiber, or like an orange rope sort of that you get from Tractor Supply that they use to bale hay with. So I do need to tie these guys up, but as I find that they're kind of growing up and growing out, I will just take them and I want to go ahead and tie them to my cattle panel trellis. Now I don't want to do it in a way that is super, super tight because I don't want wind to be blowing this thing and then it ends up sawing off the plant. I want to do it pretty loose, so something like this where I have about 1 inch to 2 inches from the trellis for the plant to just kind of hang out there. Another thing, I don't want my plants growing back behind my trellis, and that is because during the part of the season where I am taking these guys out, it is a pain to have to deal with these plants when they have wrapped themselves around these trellises. I want to keep everything, including all of their branches, on this side, and that's also going to help to increase airflow between my 2 rows of tomatoes here. You also want to be looking for any fruits that are developing. So these are all Amish paste tomatoes, so they're going to be a plum style tomato. And I can see here on the end, this is where the blossom was and the fruit started to develop. So I'm looking at all the ends of my fruit to make sure that I don't see any black spots, any black circles that are starting to develop here. That is blossom end rot, and that's going to be a sign of calcium deficiency. So as long as I don't see that, I am good. But to prevent that this year, I am having the kids come down and dump the whey from my cheese making and yogurt making into my garden, specifically into my tomatoes, because that extra calcium in that whey is going to be a great soil builder, and it's also going to help prevent blossom end rot. Another way to prevent this may not be because you have a deficiency in calcium, but it might be because your plants are not taking up the calcium from the soil, because perhaps they're not being watered well enough. If your plants are not being watered, then the roots can't take up the nutrients that they need. So there might be two reasons for a calcium deficiency where you're seeing that blossom end rot. Now in this first row, you're gonna see that my tomato plants are just really taking off. They're getting tall, and they're really, really growing well during this part of the season. As we start to walk down this last row of tomatoes, but can you see the difference in the size of these tomato plants versus the other three rows? They are much, much smaller. Okay, so this is take two. The original time that I did this, my microphone fell out and you could not hear me, and there was so much background noise. They are developing everything around us, guys, on every side of my property. It's quite sad. Anyway, so back to tomatoes. You are going to notice that these guys are much smaller than my other three rows. And it's funny because these tomatoes were started a good 2 to 3 weeks before any of my other tomatoes. So why are they smaller? Well, the reason that they're smaller is because when I start my tomatoes, I start them in a 2x2 soil block. And as they grow and the roots reach out of that soil block and they hit the air, they air prune. So there's never a chance of them becoming root bound in that 2x2 soil block. Now, when they do kind of need a bit more nourishment, I will up pot those into a 5-inch pot, which is pretty big. So 5 inches this way, and then it's about another depth of 5 inches. So it gives them a good amount of space to grow in. And then I make sure that I get them out in the garden before there's any chance that those roots are going to need more space. So these tomato plants, although they were started 2 to 3 weeks earlier than my tomato plants, these were started in about 1.5-inch peat pots. So they had a 1.5-inch diameter with about a 1.5 to 2-inch depth. And the reason they were started that way is because they were started for selling plants or selling garden starts. I have a friend who sells her plants, and so she starts so many plants and does them in those small pots, and people typically come and buy these things when they're very small plants. So she had finished selling everything for the year, and she still had some plants left over and asked if I wanted them. So she gave me about 50 tomato plants, but they were very much ready to get out of those peat pots. Now when people plant and they're using those peat pots, a lot of people like to stick them in the ground. They say they're biodegradable, they're just going to disintegrate, but I find that those pots actually inhibit the roots from being able to reach out into the soil, and so you're kind of just compounding that root bound problem. So I did remove those pots from them, stuck them in the ground, and only now are they starting to grow. So this is a really good example of why you want to be on top of your seedlings and make sure that things are not getting root bound, because it will set you back. Sometimes though, you can't get them to really ever produce a great crop for you if they're too far gone. Okay guys, well I hope that those tips were helpful. I hope that it helped you to see what I'm looking for and what I'm doing every time I'm down in the garden when I'm looking specifically at my tomato plants. I'm trying to take care of these things very well right now because the season is going to get very busy very quickly, and I know I'm going to find myself neglecting these guys because I have to be up in the house preserving the harvests that are ready to come in for that winter season. But anyways guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next one.